Hello, my name's Guy Armstrong. I'm the author and publisher of this book, How Essential is Fluoride? It's a culmination of about 8 to 10 years of research. I'm presenting it publicly on Wednesday 28th of October at Vic Books Puputia campus here in Wellington, New Zealand at 6 p.m. When I first committed to writing and publishing this work, I wanted to produce something that was uplifting for everyone, whether they supported or opposed fluoridation of milk, salt water, dental products, etc. Whether people were on the fence about the whole thing, whether people were very detail-oriented or more relaxed about details and more concerned with bigger picture sort of things. And I'm confident this work will help us all take a few steps toward greater dental and overall health. I'm the kind of person that has no problem trusting experts in normal life, yet I oppose the addition of fluorides to water supplies, so this is somewhat aberrant behaviour. And the reason here is that in the 10 or so years I've spent looking at this issue, I think it's quite unique. Well, this book helps to explain why, and I think many people before me have seen the uniqueness of the issue and have responded in their own way. The nature of my own opposition has changed over the years in terms of reason and understanding. This book focuses on one argument or question within the larger fluoride or fluoridation issue, the question of whether the element fluorine or the mineral compound fluoride should be considered an essential element or compound in human nutrition. This book's a commentary on science, politics, public health and business. I write as a citizen, not a professional in one of these fields. I currently work in hospitality. In 2010 I graduated from Victoria University Wellington with a degree in biology. I've studied CWF since around late 2009 in my spare time. I say in one of the first sentences in the blurb at the back of the book that I believe experts involved in the promotion of CWF have exaggerated in their claim that fluoride is a nutritional essential in the same category as iodine, selenium and so on. And I go into detail into reasons why in the book, the chief amongst them being the claim that fluorine was a nutritional essential was a convenient way to attempt to nullify or address the claim made by opponents of fluoridation that using fluorides in water supplies was mass medication. I believe this book is currently the most thorough and detailed work on the planet on this topic in the English language. I don't say it's perfect, there's still room for improvement. There are a few unanswered questions I have, and my research has continued post-publication. From continuing my research, I can say that my findings are more verified, so I can share more examples of the exaggeration of essentiality than just what I present in the book. This book is not about claims of safety or harm from CWF, although this is touched on a little to give context to various points of view. You may recall the Icelandic musician and activist Hordur Torfason speaking here in Wellington's Paramount Theatre maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Apologies if I mispronounced the name. One of the things he said was that criticism could be a form of love, though it's often given out of anger or other hurtful feelings. It can be given compassionately. So this book can be considered my love letter to dentistry and public health in New Zealand, or any corporate influenced democracy, I suppose. One thing I want to say here is that the integrity and honour of the majority of people within dentistry and public health experts in New Zealand, Australia, America, wherever, is not assumed to be poor. In writing this book I became less suspicious of selfish motivations because I spent so much time looking through the dental literature and saw so much desire on behalf of dentists and the related professions to help. Well, why should a book like this exist when there's so much already written on fluorides and fluoridation? There's a couple of reasons I'll give you now. One is that this is a point in which advocates and opponents of fluoridation have butted their heads together on many times over the years with little elaboration in public media, and both groups have often simplified this issue to bullet points with little explanation, though of course there's a few exceptions. And this simplification occurs in part because the issue is more complicated than a simple yes or no, and because both sides usually believe there are more important issues. Another reason is that there's a presupposition that experts are objective, and this is the real thing I'm getting at. I think it's in some ways more important than whether fluorine should or should not be considered a nutritional essential. Well, here's a couple of examples. This is from a 1982 nutrition textbook published in the UK. The author of the chapter is Neil Jenkins. He's an advocate of fluoridation. This contents page, it's a little about Jenkins. Now, Jenkins spends just over a page on this topic. And on page 57, he tells us that While it seems premature to conclude that fluoride is essential, although this is often stated, there certainly are indications that this is so, at least under certain conditions, but more experiments are needed to clarify this technically difficult question. Then he moves on to the next part of his discussion. He doesn't tell us why this is often stated. He doesn't give us any reason, and my work does provide many reasons. Some are obvious, like the desire of dentists and public health officials to have an uplifting effect on the dental health of electorates, and some are more subtle and more difficult to define or see clearly. Behaviour is often easier to see than motivations for that behaviour. Another reason might be that many people who've opposed fluoridation over the years have been a little aggressive or even clumsy sometimes, and that sort of behaviour works against them and could be used as a justification for ignoring anyone who opposes the measure. Here's another example of an expert pointing to this exaggeration of essentiality back in 1971. Dr. T.W. Cuttress reviewed the 1970 World Health Organization document in the New Zealand Dental Journal. His review was complimentary, describing the review as objective and impartial until one small paragraph. Professor Ingvar Eriksson, a special consultant and editor, introduces the monograph with a short but comprehensive and interesting introduction. I found his statement, page 14, for the formation of a caries-resistant enamel, a certain fluoride supply is evidently essential, provocative on two accounts and not proven on the evidence supplied by the contributors to this volume. Neither of these two experts, Dr. Jenkins and Dr. Cuttress, provide us with a reason for the exaggeration, and in a little over 10 years of studying this in my spare time, I've only found this exaggeration acknowledged, I think, 4 times from advocates of fluoridation, each time with no real reason given, and twice quite aggressively justified. Remember, the experts like to claim that they're objective and so on. They do not often claim that it's okay to exaggerate, although I'll add a little asterisk in here. One of these people does kind of give a reason. That's in chapter 5 of this book. Now, if you search the recent 2014-2015 review of water fluoridation by New Zealand's Sir Peter Gluckman and his team of researchers, you'll find the word deficiency only appears when they're discussing iodine, not fluorine or fluoride. I'll show you now. So, searching for deficient, this will cover, deficient, deficiency, deficiencies, and so on. Iodine deficiency, iodine deficiency, iodine deficiency, iodine deficiency, iodine, iodine, iodine deficiency, iodine deficiency, iodine deficiency, iodine deficiency. Yet we've had experts telling us for many decades in New Zealand that our soils and waters, and therefore our food and us, are deficient in fluorides. So it's kind of interesting Sir Peter doesn't make this claim. Well, here's a couple of examples from a long time ago. This is Hawke's Bay Herald Tribune, 8th July 1954. This is Mr. Marshall, the Minister of Health, telling us controlled fluoridation of water supplies deficient in fluorine had the overwhelming support, etc. And this is 1957, Dr. Lynch telling us that just as the immature soil of New Zealand is deficient in iodine and many other elements, it also appeared to be deficient in fluorides. And those of you that have been listening to Radio New Zealand will be aware Professor Alan Blackman has also made claim of fluorine's essentiality recently. He's from Auckland. I contacted him to ask about what his sort of evidence was or what his reasons were, and couldn't get in touch with him. Well, this book focuses, as you can see from the subtitle, on what experts say. And I looked at 3 categories of information where experts communicate. So there's public media like newspapers, I ignored social media, then there's technical literature, and I focused primarily excuse me, on the literature of 3 groups that have advocated community water fluoridation over the years: the United States Public Health Service, the United States National Academy of Sciences, and the World Health Organization. And then there are the experiments that are cited in the writings of these 3 expert groups. So we go newspapers, technical literature, experiments. Well, the experiments I cite in the first chapter of the book are those cited either by these 3 groups or the experiments themselves. The second chapter looks at the deeper explanations of experts in technical literature. The third investigates some of the communications privately coming from politicians to individual members of the public, in which health ministers and so on were claiming fluoride essential in the 1950s. If you're wondering where these documents came from, the copies were made in the 1950s and have been available to the New Zealand public since the early 1980s in the archives. And this archives, I mean the archives building in Mulgrave Street, Wellington. Well, there's also some at the National Library on Molesworth Street. In the fourth chapter, I quote a lot of experts who supported fluoridation and their statements on the abundance of fluorine in food, and this is quite an incredible chapter when it's compared with the amount of claims made that water supplies are deficient, and we're all at risk of this fluoride deficiency. The fifth chapter takes a bigger picture look at the fluoridation issue and begins by looking at Australasian and American media, then goes through some of the relationships within the fluoridation issue. The sixth chapter looks at the bigger picture of dental health. One of the claims I make is that because so much focus has gone on fluorides, this has inadvertently or unintentionally taken focus off the importance of elements and compounds that are definitely essential in human nutrition, for instance iodine, magnesium, protein and so on. And there are 9 appendices in the book. Thank you very much.